Hey everybody, this is Robot here from Vespa Motorsport here in San Diego and scooterwest.com for all things Vespa in North America. We carry pretty much every spare part for any of the modern Vespas, most of them which are in stock, along with old Vespa parts. But today I'm doing a video on more advanced repairs of your transmission and the specialized tools that are needed. If you watched a lot of my other videos on doing belt jobs or standard services, it's all pretty much similar between all the different scooters, whether you got a GTS, an LX, Primavera, Sprint. Just the size of the components is a little bit different. Right here I got a 50cc engine block, a Piaggio one. And so what I'm going to go into repairing is your driven pulley. And the driven pulley houses your clutch. This is the clutch bell. You got your 3 centrifugal clutch shoes. These are held back with springs. And back here is a large spring, and that's what essentially tensions the belt. You know, it keeps a constant tension on the belt, while the variator, which is the device that uses centrifugal force and these roller weights, changes the ratio. The reasons you would need to take this apart is standard service. At the higher miles, the inner part of this is sealed with grease, and oftentimes the seals start to fail, and it's a good idea to go in there and clean the grease out, put new seals in, and re-grease the whole assembly so it slides nice. Other reasons you'd tear it apart is replacement of the clutch. Sometimes the pulleys are damaged, or you're doing performance upgrades such as changing the contra spring, which puts the tension on the belt. You know, if you're building a high performance motor, you're going to need to tension the belt a little bit more, you know, at the expense of the belt wearing a little bit more and more friction lost. You know, that's a fine balance. I'm not going to go into the tuning of a CVT transmission right now. It's definitely a good video for people that want to do that. I've covered some of the basic tuning mods, like going with a lighter than stock roller weight on a stock engine, and how you can gain some benefits in acceleration there. For quite a while, it's always been difficult to take these apart. You can physically hold them and take this nut off. If you did that, this clutch would go flying across the room. That spring is under a tremendous amount of tension. And that applies once you get up to the 500cc scooters. The very large scooters, those springs are very, very strong with those big clutches. For all the driven pulleys, Piaggio has always had a set of factory tools. They're very expensive to purchase outright. Obviously, they make sense when you're in a shop environment. This is the tool that compresses this whole entire clutch assembly, or it actually goes that direction, and holds it all together while you loosen the nut. And then there's the large 46mm and I think a 52, depending on the clutch style, that will take this large center nut off. And when you're replacing the seals, if you've bought the deluxe belt kits or service kits, we've had a lot of customers ask, well, what are these seals and O-rings for? I don't know how to change them. Well, they're buried in here, and if you're going to do a full transmission service, I would suggest changing out those parts, and you're going to need a set of tools to do so. So here's the factory tools. You know, they're very expensive. I'm not going to talk about how to get them. We could order them if you really wanted these lovely black oxide tools. Fortunately, we carry the tools needed from an aftermarket company, Bizzetti, and they work just as well to do the job. So this functions exactly the same. It has 3 pins that hold the clutch in place. You're able to tension, you know, hold the clutch all together. The change of seals without tearing up the seals, we have TOOLCCMV, and that's the clutch seal installation tool. It actually works a little bit better than the factory one. The factory one, you got to thread it onto the shaft, and you'll see that, while this one just drops right on. It works fine. I had a machinist here locally in San Diego. He makes these for us. The last thing you're going to need, we don't have these available, a 46mm socket. This is pretty much if you're doing the LX, ET4, any of the GT 200, GT range scooters. If you're doing the Primavera or Sprint, it's going to be the same size nut as what's found on the 50cc. Obviously, the very large clutches, I think they go up to the 52mm nut. But you could purchase these at an auto parts store. This is a proto one, which is kind of a name brand, fancier, you know, American-made one. But you could buy axle. They're commonly found or used for taking the axles off cars. So you can find them at an auto parts store. Pretty inexpensive, like under 20 bucks for a very large size socket. Let's jump into using the tools. So part number on the clutch compressor is TOOLCCMV. You know, modern Vespa clutch compressor, I guess is the acronym for that. We have these available on our website, scooterwest.com. Also look in the description of this video. I'll have a lot of the part numbers. We're gonna start adding more part numbers to the descriptions. I know a lot of people comment on the videos. I wish I had time to answer those comments, but unfortunately I work a ton and I have no time when I get home. So I hope other experienced Vespa people help out with the comments. Obviously there's forums to go on to that can be very useful if you have technical questions, but unfortunately I personally don't have the time. Just chiming in on something different than what we're ultimately getting to, which is taking apart this ET4 clutch right here. So you want to position this tool. You can use a socket, or you're going to need a socket, like a 13 millimeter socket once you get this tight. And you can see I have the 3 pins. There's various holes. You go all the way up with this tool, and you can see it's kind of just held in place right now. You know, obviously the nuts all holding it all together. I have it clamped in a vise, so you're going to need to have a bench vise or somebody that's really, really strong holding it. Again, this is a tool that's more intended for the more experienced do-it-yourself mechanic, you know. Or say you have multiple scooters and you want to maintain them. That's what this tool is ideal for. Where you're not buying the factory tool, save yourself from bringing this complete assembly to a dealership so they can take it apart for you. So pretty much this nut is supposed to be torqued to around 80 foot-pounds, or not 80 foot-pounds, excuse me, 60 foot-pounds. I'm carefully loosening the nut, you know, with a big breaker bar. You can see it slipped a little bit. You gotta make sure you have the vise quite tight. So take the nut off. So I'm gonna cheat and just use an auto ratchet to carefully, you know, so you can see it's releasing the spring right in here. Obviously it goes a little faster when you have a power tool versus doing that with a hand tool, but doesn't really matter what you use. It just safely releases tension on this spring right here. So now that we have that separated, we could further take apart the whole driven pulley and clutch assembly. I'll show you 2 different clutches. I just changed a clutch 2 days ago. This is a GTS, so the shoes are a little bit different. They all function the same. See how that's about a millimeter left? That's about the service limit of this clutch. So if you went in there and did a belt service and you saw a clutch with only a millimeter remaining, that's when it's time to change this clutch. This one still has a lot of service life left on it. It's a little worn on these edges. Sometimes they'll wear a little bit more on the leading or trailing edge, depending on the design of the clutch. Another reason you replace a clutch, not only because the springs are broke or anything, or it's grease contaminated. You can see some of the grease is slung in there. It'd be a good idea to clean this with a brake parts cleaner. But this one's not too bad. Sometimes the clutch is very noisy, and it's because this plate right here starts to get loose. You can bend it back into place, but usually I just say just replace the clutch, you know, the whole assembly, and it will quiet your whole transmission up. So if you hear something that sounds like a Ducati dry clutch, if you ever heard that, kind of real chattery sounding noise, at idle, it's usually this plate that's jiggling around. So worn clutch, here's a clutch, still has some service life. Just like in the belt videos, I'd sand those all up and dress it, clean it all up. But the big problem with why you want to change these seals is they start to break down and they start leaking the grease. This little plastic cup helps keep a lot of the grease out of the clutch assembly, but you know, you got to wipe that all out, clean it. You can see You know, there's a little bit of grease on everything, and that's pretty normal as these transmissions start getting a little older. In here, you can see you just have the bare pulley, and it rotates and goes up. And they have different motions based on the design. But what we're going to concentrate on is to look in there for worn parts. Oftentimes you could just take this grease cup right off by hand, just twist, and look at that. By golly, there's no grease in there. No grease at all because it's leaked all out. And not only that, it usually flings it out into the belt as it wears out. But normally these pockets are completely filled with grease. Kind of makes my job easier because when you take these apart when they're really greasy, they're quite a mess. There's going to be 4 pins. And I don't have a needle nose on me right now, but you pull those 4 pins out, you can see how they even work. It kind of cams up and down there. It's kind of nice without the grease, you can see what's going on. If you have the service book, you can measure the specifications of all this. See how there's a little slop up and down? Everything moves a little bit. I would say that's still serviceable. If there's sharp edges on these metal things from these pins cutting into the steel, it may be a good idea to replace this part. Or if the pins are totally trashed. If this clutch was run much longer without grease, it would eventually trash all these parts being metal to metal. But as long as they stay greased, they tend to last quite a long time. And again, you need to have good seals to hold the grease back. So that just pulls right off. You can see something failed in this transmission at some point. I just picked some aluminum chunks off that. I would say the front pulley, I just found this in a random box of parts, so there's some reason it came out of a bike. You want to check these surfaces for stuff like this. If you sanded this all down, it would still be serviceable. You know, get these little aluminum chunks, so that would tear up a new belt in no time. And I didn't even catch that. It's not something I normally see. Again, I just grabbed some random clutch I had. This one looks pretty good right here, this pulley. Make sure the pins are nice. Kind of like this clutch. There's not all this grease. Normally when you take these apart, they're a big greasy mess. You know, obviously with brake parts cleaner or solvent tank, you can clean all these parts. You want to check these bearings. They're also lubricated with the grease. It spins very nice on that. And if you have the shaft, you know, that the clutch goes on, the shaft, you could spin this on the shaft and make sure there's no noise on this needle bearing. And again, these tend to last quite a long time. It's the bearing that when the scooter's idling, that's what it freewheels. So the clutch is disengaged and this pulley is spinning, but the clutch is engaged and it just spins on these bearings. Oftentimes when you know they're on their way out, it'll make when the clutch is engaged and the engine's at idle, you'll hear a whirling noise in the rear end. And that's usually an indication that one of these 2 or both bearings are on their way out, either because of lack of grease or some other issues. So you got the 4 pins. The pins are pretty expensive. If you see any type of galling or anything, you could replace those pins. Obviously you want to look up the correct ones for your scooter. You can find them in the parts guides on our website. We have the PDF parts guides. We'll eventually have new exploded parts diagrams and illustrations of all these parts. Usually it's grease cup, there's not really any issues there. But we're going to go ahead and take this further apart. You're going to need a flat blade screwdriver, and it's pretty straightforward, easy to change those seals out. And these are the culprit. You even see all the grease that's outside these seals. They're just on their way out. Obviously you don't want to stab yourself. I just gave the screwdriver a little twist. It obviously damages the seal. You can see the lip edges are all trash on it. So those seals are both trash. Do the same on the back side. Again, this would be useful if you're looking to tune your scooter, try a different clutch on it. All these tools come into play helping you do a clutch job on your Vespa scooter or Piaggio or any scooter. For the most part, nearly all the CVT transmissions found on scooters are all pretty identical with just subtle variations, mainly in the size of the component and the fitment. There's a couple different clutch configurations, but they're all, I don't know, they're all the same. They're all just like, And keep in mind, if you're doing this on a GTS, it's got 2 different O-ring sizes on there. So there's a larger O-ring that would go down in that groove. But this is the 150 clutch, so a little simpler design. Again, you can clean all these parts in the parts washer, inspect them further. If you watch this and you're like, oh, I don't want to tackle it, I don't want to buy the tools, you're always welcome to send it to our mail order service department. And you know, one of our techs that's familiar with doing this on a daily basis, or not quite daily, maybe every couple days we do this on a scooter that maybe has 36,000 miles. In San Diego, there's a lot of people that actually use their scooters and rack up some serious miles. I wish there was more scooters on the road, but people actually use them, so that's good for service, and people want to keep them going. So O-rings, pretty self-explanatory. Just roll those right in. And it's nice to roll them sometimes, and we'll grease those after the fact. The seals, on the other hand, you buy the Maxima waterproof grease. We have that available on our website. I found it's perfectly adequate. The grease is rated for, you know, the specifications are good for, you know, lubricating the pins on these and staying in a sealed system. So it's no problem doing that. So what I find is you want to get this pretty square in there. Don't worry about getting a little grease on the surface, because you're going to clean everything before it goes together. And just work it in there. Try to push it in there as square as you can. And I always found doing this on a metal table does the trick pretty good. See how it's pushed in perfectly flush? I mean, that's exactly the way you want that installed. It always helps to have a small amount of grease on all these surfaces when you press these little seals in. Again, kind of get it positioned. You know, it's also possible to use a little mallet to push that in, but you know, see how it didn't quite push in on that side? You could just use your fingers sometimes and push the seal. The seals are always designed to be soft and be pushed in by hand. So you want to get that where it's level. You know, just use the pressure of your thumbs to get it in there. And if it goes a little further, that's no big deal. It can bottom out as well, and it would be just fine. So that's all in there. You can wipe off the grease and you're good. So it's very difficult to just drop this right on. Oftentimes we'll just cut the lip of the seal and you'll end up with a leaking seal again. So you're going to need to use a seal protector that has a taper that protects the seals when you're putting it back on. The original factory one just threads right on. The tool we've had made just sets on. Obviously you don't want to pull the clutch back up because it will pull the seal protector with it. You'll want to grease this, put a thin layer of grease on the tool, and then we'll slide the grease the inner part of the clutch. Some grease, just go all around in there. Try to avoid getting much grease on the surfaces out here because you want to protect the seals. So pretty much just drop the movable pulley half onto the fixed pulley half. That's the technical term for this. And just keep constant pressure going down with it. Yeah, there's going to be a seal, and see how it just drops right down that edge? No problems there. And if you tried to do that without the seal protector, I do show, one of my past videos show how to do it. It's very difficult to do it successfully. So you're best having one of the seal protectors to hold that, keep the seal lips from getting cut. So rotate the 2 halves until you get the correct holes. That's a lubrication pass, a grease pass-through hole, but you want that hole exposed. You put a little dab of grease and drop each one of the pins in there. And sometimes it will take a little wiggle. See how I gave it a little wiggle? And you just go around and do that on all 4 positions. Again, sometimes they'll bind up a little bit. You may need the wiggle, the movable half, just to get it in place. All right, so the next thing is the correct amount of grease. You know, in the factory owner's manual or service manual, they have exactly how many grams you got to put into the clutch. Well, it's pretty difficult to volumetrically measure grease. But it's what I find works best is just fill those cavities nearly completely full. See, that one's a little under, a little bit more. And then just kind of use your finger to squeegee the rest off. Obviously, if you don't want to get grease on your hands, you could wear some gloves. Once that's all squeegeed out of the way, go ahead and take the cup. Got the O-rings are all greased up and new and fresh, no problems. You take the excess grease and pack that into the needle bearings, since that needle bearing does rely on the grease. So, and you could also put another dab of grease a little further into the thing. Once you get that all done, you got to wipe all the excess grease. The last place you want grease is on these pulley halves where the belt rides. You'll end up with a belt that will start squealing because it's slipping, because the grease has contaminated the pulley surfaces. That's why they got the seals, keep the grease out of it. I've seen a lot of problems when those seals start to leak on high mileage Vespas, where it contaminates not only the clutch, but the belt drive, and then ultimately will destroy this part as well because of lack of lubrication. The thing feels great now. I mean, you can even tell a complete difference how it moves. It's very nice motion. You can see a small amount of grease got pushed down there into the groove. Just get in there with a clean rag or paper towel and just wipe the last little bit. I mean, a real small amount of grease getting on the belt's not gonna be the end of the world to be able to displace it. Every scooter, usually they have a standing free length measurement for this spring. You can measure it against what the service limit is. Once it hits the service limit, it'd be wise to replace that spring. It's pretty inexpensive. Oftentimes you'll end up with belt squeal, even though the pulleys are all clean and you have a fresh belt and you're wondering why your belt will slip. Not clutch slippage, but I'm talking belt slippage. And it sounds similar, but a little quieter than like an old crappy car going down the road with a fan belt slipping. You drop that right into place. And the whole idea of this cup is it does two functions. It keeps the grease from contaminating the clutch, and also, you know, whenever this thing rotates, there's friction, so there's less friction when it rotates on that nylon sleeve. So now the clutch is all cleaned up. The shoes are in perfect shape after sanding them a bit. All the springs are intact. This still has serviceable life. And an indication that it's not completely contaminated with grease is after you sand it, you don't see any oil showing through the clutch. It shows it still has some life, and the back plate, like I was talking about earlier, is still in good serviceable condition. So we're gonna get this all set like such. Get this into the tool right here. Get the 3 pins lined up, and I'll just hand tighten this at first. The trick to this is you can see there's 2 flats on the clutch. Before you tension this too much, you want to get it as close as you can, so you don't need to do too much wiggling around to get it lined up. So we'll go ahead and cheat and use the power tool. Kind of makes the job easier. So I'm kind of, see, it still moves pretty easy, but as the tension gets a lot higher, it's gonna be harder to move. So I still move it. And now we're getting close to, there you go. Is what I like to do with these nuts that hold the clutch in place is put a small amount of Loctite on them. From the factory, they never put Loctite on these, but I've seen a lot of them come loose, whether they were just not tightened enough from the factory, or mechanic was careless and didn't correctly torque this thing. It's got really thin threads on it, so take care of getting it started too as well. That's the difficult part of putting one of these together without the tool, you know, this tool that holds it. Got the clutch on there. I got my torque wrench set to 60 foot-pounds. And it's going to draw the clutch up the last little bit there. So again, make sure the tool doesn't slip and fall out of the tool. You may want to support it just a bit. There you go, 60 foot-pounds. That's all you need. So there you go. You got your whole driven pulley completely rebuilt and overhauled. And this has plenty of life still left in it. Even after cleaning up some of the odd damage of some aluminum that's been lodged into the pulley, I went ahead and sanded it out. Clutch is in good shape. Everything's greased up. Everything's going to work a lot better. Of course, you've seen many of my videos where you steer this like a little steering wheel, and that's how you would get the clutch in there. You can see I can hold it just barely with one hand. It takes quite a bit of force to hold that. Obviously, the larger engines are going to be a little bit more difficult to do. So you'll find if you're an advanced do-it-yourself mechanic and want to handle every aspect of all the services on your Vespa, this would be a wise tool to invest in. Whether you're in some part of the country where you don't have easy access to a local dealership that may have the factory tool, I can tell you most of the motorcycle shops wouldn't have something like this as well. I'm talking a Yamaha, Honda, Big Line, or even a small motorcycle shop. It's a pretty unique tool, but very useful when it comes to rebuilding a driven pulley. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, Vespa Motorsport. Follow me on Instagram, Robot Vespa. Hope that helped everybody out, whether you're rebuilding a Vespa or a Piaggio scooter. Until next time, Robot here.